In this final chapter of this tutorial, we're going to look at caustics and mental ray. Now, we skipped caustics before. I mentioned it very quickly earlier in the tutorial and said that we'd come back to it later. So we're going to cover it in this chapter. Let's go ahead and open up an example scene to get us started here. And the scene I'm looking for is scene number 7. It's going to be the scene Caustics Start. So let's go ahead and open up that scene. And this is what we have. It's a very simple scene here. We have a background here. We also have a vase with a couple of plant objects in there. Okay, and the vase is transparent, and we're going to use that to create caustics. We also have a light up here. Let's go ahead and just do a test render. And when we do that, this is what we get. It's a very dark scene. It has all the default settings right now, so Final Gather's on, all that stuff. So let's go ahead and change some of these settings. Let's take Final Gather and turn it off. Let's also turn on the geometry caching here and lock it down. And let's also go down here and lower our anti-aliasing settings to, let's just put it to a setting of low. That preset will work out just fine. And when we render out again, we get ourselves a dark render, but no Final Gather this time. Renders out quicker, which is exactly what we want. Now, to fix this darkening problem, we're going to go ahead and use some gamma corrections. So let's go up to the Customize menu, and we'll go to Preferences. Go to the Gamma tab over here, and let's enable gamma correction here. And the main setting here is the 2.2 gamma. We don't really care about bitmap file settings over here simply because we're not using any textures in this scene, so it really won't make a difference. Just the gamma here is what will make the difference. So a 2.2 will work out just fine. So I'll hit OK, and there we go. There's the gamma correction. Looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and close this. You notice that there is an Omni light up here, and this Omni light is a mental ray area Omni light. So it's creating some nice shadows and some very beautiful lighting in our scene. But that's not the light that we're going to use for caustics. What we want to do is create a light specifically for caustics. So to do that, we'll go to the Create menu. We'll go to Lights. We'll go to Standard Lights. And we'll create ourselves a free spotlight. So we'll select that. Just select right here in front of the vase to create it. And move this up. Let's go ahead and place this. So it's pretty much going to be right up here in front of the vase. And it's going to be aiming right toward it. Like this. Okay, so it's going to be aiming toward it and a little bit down at an angle. And in terms of the position here, well, this is pretty well. For me, I'm working with a unit setup of centimeters, so I'm going to place this at about 4 centimeters in front of the vase and about 4 centimeters up. So that's going to work out pretty well. Okay, let's do a test render here real quick. And what we'll notice is that the spotlight here is in our scene. It looks very unrealistic, very unnatural, and it looks bad. Well, I don't want to light up the scene with the spotlight simply because my Omni light's already doing a really good job of doing that for me. So what I want to do, editor, edit that out of the video, edit that out of the video. Got to figure out where I left off. God damn it. Where did I leave off? Oh yeah, the spotlight has to be off. Okay. Start again in 3, 2, 1. So what I want to do, I want to use this spotlight here as the caustic emitter. This is going to shoot out caustic photons into my scene, but I don't want it to light up my scene. So with the spotlight selected, I'll just go to the Modify panel over here. And under the General Parameters, these settings are perfectly fine. I don't want shadows turned on simply because I want to turn this light off. I'm going to go to the Intensity rollout here. I'm going to take the multiplier and tone that down to 0. I don't need any light decay because this light is off. Essentially, I want this light to be turned off. I only want it to emit caustics. Okay. Now we'll go down here to the Mental Ray Indirect Illumination tab here, or rollout, and we'll see that automatic mode is turned on by default. I want to turn automatic mode off, and I want to turn on manual mode because that's the mode that I want to use. Now, if we render this out again, we're not going to get any caustics because we haven't turned it on in the render setup window, but what I want to make sure is that that spotlight is not shining any light in my scene, which it's not doing right now, which is a good thing. Okay. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the rendering menu. I'll open up Render Setup, and you want to make sure you're in the Indirect Illumination tab and go to the Caustics and Global Illumination Rollout, and we're going to turn on Caustics. Now let's go ahead and leave the default settings. We'll come back to this stuff later. We're not going to worry about it now. So with Caustics turned on, we can go ahead and render this out, and we'll get some caustics in our scene. But the first thing we're going to notice is an error message from Mental Ray, and it's going to say there are no caustic generators in the scene. When we hit OK, Mental Ray will render out. However, it's not going to render out with caustics. This actually happens by default because Mental Ray doesn't have objects set up for caustics. When you're working in 3ds Max 2010, by default, none of these objects in our scene are going to have caustics enabled for them. Okay, so to do that, what we need to do is we need to select the objects in our scene that we want to work with caustics and manually activate the caustics for them. Okay, now in this case, I only want one object in the scene to work with caustics, and that's this vase right here. Since it's transparent and shiny in its glass, this is the object that's going to work with caustics, not the floor and not this little plant object here. So I'm going to choose the vase, I'm going to right click to open up a quad menu, and I'm going to go to Object Properties. This is going to open up the Object Properties window here. This is going to open up the Object Properties window here. And what I want to do is go to the Mental Ray tab here. And you notice that there's a section for caustics and global illumination right here in the center. Okay? You notice that generate and receive global illumination photons is turned on. But when you come to caustics, only the receive flag is turned on. The generate flag is turned off. You'll notice that only the receive caustics option is turned on and the generate caustics option is turned off. This is what Mental Ray was complaining about before. So let's turn that option on, hit OK, and now let's render out again. You'll notice there's no more error message. Mental Ray starts to render out caustics, and there we go. Now this is a very bad result, but the good thing is that we know caustics is working. Of course it's not working too great, but don't worry about that, we'll be fixing that next. Okay, so now we know caustics is working. Let's close that and let's get over here to our caustic settings and change some settings on our light. We know that the caustic settings for the light is way too bright right now, so what we need to do is reduce those settings. But there's another problem. The Omni light right now is automatically shooting out caustics. If I go to the Omni light parameters, go down to the Mental Ray indirect illumination rollout, you notice that the automatic mode is turned on. So let's turn it off. I do not want to turn on the manual settings. I want to keep them both off so that this Omni light doesn't shoot out or generate any caustics. Okay, so now with that done, let's render out again and see what we get. Okay, still looks bright. There's less caustics now, less of those little bright white spots everywhere because we turned the caustics off for the Omni light. So let's take the spotlight and see if we can adjust some settings. Let's go to the energy parameter here and knock that down to about 250. That way it's much darker. We'll leave the decay at 2.0. Which, as you remember before, that means it's using an inverse square decay, which is realistic and physically accurate. Now, before we've worked with the GI photons parameter here, now we're going to work with caustic photons here. Alright? I'm also going to go to the color, and I'm going to change the color to a green color. The reason I'm doing that is just for display purposes, just so that you can see it, and it'll be easy for you to see the caustics inside of our scene when I start rendering this out. Of course, it's not physically accurate, but don't worry about that. That's not really important. So now that the caustics have been tweaked and changed, let's go ahead and render this out and see what we end up with. Okay, now we end up with something a little bit more interesting. We don't have the super bright caustics anymore. Now with an energy setting of only 250, the caustics are more manageable. And you can see the caustic shape starting to take place here in our render. Of course, the problem with the caustics right now is that it's very splotchy and very spotty. You can see all the individual spots of caustics in the scene, which is no good. One of the ways to fix that is by increasing the number of caustic photons. So just like with global illumination photons, if you have a small number of caustic photons, you're going to get yourself a result like this. But there is a difference between caustic photons and global illumination photons, okay? With GI photons, you have to use millions and millions of photons to get yourself a good result. With caustic photons, you actually don't. You can actually go for a very small setting. So right now I'm using 10,000 caustic photons. I'm going to go with 100,000, which is actually a small amount of photons. But when you're talking about caustics, it actually works out pretty well. You can see that another render shows that just by increasing the caustics to 100,000, which is actually a relatively low number, we get ourselves a pretty good smooth caustic result. It's not the best. There is a little bit of artifacting, some splotching and things like that, but it's not as bad as before. Okay, so we can actually get ourselves a good caustic result with a small number of caustics as compared to GI photons. So it's just one thing to make note of and keep in mind. Now, a very important element in this scene is the material on the vase. You see, caustics interact and work with materials. Caustics work best with materials that are speculars, materials that are shiny and reflective, the same way that caustics work in real life. Also, objects that are transparent, like this glass, okay? So, how we can control this caustic effect also is determined by the glass of this vase or any type of material that's going to work with caustics, in this case this glass. So let me close this. Let's open up the material editor by hitting M on the keyboard, M for material. And you notice that the first material here in the upper left slot is a glass material, which happens to be called glass. Okay. Now right here I'm using the mental ray architectural and design shaders, which are very realistic and physically accurate. Okay. If you go to the templates rollout, the first rollout up here, you can actually go to a drop down list where you can choose different templates of materials. So you can choose things like rough concrete, polished concrete, glazed ceramic tiles, rubber, leather, glass, water, chrome, metal, all kinds of stuff. You can go ahead and use these transparent material presets down here like thin glass, solid glass, and physical glass, even frosted glass to get you started. So in this case, I went ahead and started using solid glass here. Okay, I'm not going to change it though. I'm going to leave it as is. It's perfectly fine. If we go to the main material parameters rollout, we have some important material parameters here. Now the most important, probably the most important material parameters here that are going to directly affect the caustics in the scene is the refraction parameters down here. Okay, the transparency is set to 1, which means that it's a perfectly clean glass material and light goes right through it. Okay, now there's a setting down here that says IOR. IOR is short for index of refraction. Now right now it's set to 1.52. Now different glass materials in the real world have different indices of refraction. In this case I'm going for a very common index of refraction found in many glass and many common types of glass, which is 1.52. And we'll actually get to see later how changing the index of refraction actually affects the caustics in the scene. Down here in the next rollout we have BRDF. This determines the reflectivity and the weight and the reflection angle of the object or the material. Editor, at the video there was some kind of car in the background. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Down here we have the BRDF. Now the BRDF is going to determine the reflectivity angle of the material. Okay, this mimics the way that shiny and reflective objects in the real world. Editor, edit that out of the video. There was a person in the background. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Down here we have the BRDF rollout. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Or actually, let's just go up here. Okay, start again in 3, 2, 1. If we come down here, we have this BRDF rollout. And right here, we can control the physical accuracy or the physical realism of the reflectivity angle of the material. This is the way that objects work and behave in the real world. Okay, we have two options, a custom option down here, and we have ourselves an automatic option up here. Now the automatic option is going to use something called Fresnel reflections. For more on that, you can do some research on that on Google, and you can read some papers on that. It actually pertains to the way that reflections work in the real world, and it's based on the index of refraction of the object. And the index of refraction, as we saw before, is set to 1.52. So changing the index of refraction will change the Fresnel reflection effect here of the shader, which is actually pretty important. I'm going to go ahead and choose the automatic mode, which is determined by the index of refraction. That's actually the most physically accurate and realistic way of working with the reflections of the material here. So I just wanted to show you that real quick. Let me close that. So let's end this video here. In the next video, we're going to look at how to tweak the caustics, how to alter the caustics, and even how to change the caustics by changing a parameter on the material of the vase. But we'll see that in the next video, so I'll see you there.